Good evening. Some of you may have been expecting the Dharma Talk to be given by Shokuchi, because some time ago, possibly before the retreat that we just had, I sent out an email saying that I'm delighted there will be 2 guest speakers during the practice period, Shokuchi and Jean. Shokuchi was scheduled to be giving the Dharma Talk tonight, but through a combination of technicalities and, I suppose, life situation, she decided to step back from it. The technicalities are that she was also supposed to be Kokyo for the full moon Bodhisattva precept ceremony on Saturday. And I saw before we got started that there was a few emails from her expressing concern that she hadn't received the link yet. And so I sent a specific email to her in reply saying, here it is, I hope you can still make it. But she didn't receive the links until hours later, and we speculated that it may have been due to all the political activity going on East Coast America on Saturday night. Maybe the satellites were full or congested. It took one email about 5 hours to get through and another one about 6 hours to get through. So she felt as though she would like to have a clear run of successful links before she commits to giving a talk on a specific night. Okay. And I got the impression that there was a lot of stress and anxiety around her as she is in Brooklyn, New York, and election fever was beginning to run high. And she said there was a lot of tension in the United States. So I'm sorry that you don't have the opportunity yet to meet with Shokuchi in a Dharma talk. And just as Rebecca was able to stand in for her on Saturday night, I'm standing in for her on tonight, Wednesday night. But I do hope that you get to meet her during this practice period. Maybe I'd say who Shokuchi is. Some of you already know. And we've been working together for close to 20 years. Not quite 20 years, but close. We've been leading or co-leading Zen and yoga retreats at Tassajara and Green Gulch. And that has been wonderful. I get to teach Zen, but I also get to attend her wonderful yoga classes. And we get to hang out together, so we've had a good working relationship over the 20 years, a great practice energy between us, so people say. And it's really good to be at the likes of Tassajara and Green Gulch co-leading Zen and yoga retreats. She did come over to Ireland maybe in 2016, and we tried to have a Zen and yoga retreat here. It was very poorly attended, and we still felt that it it should or ought to be possible to have a successful Zen and yoga retreat in Ireland and possibly in the UK. Shokuchi is a long-standing yoga teacher. She's been teaching for a long time. I don't know how many years, 30 years, maybe more. And she is also a Zen priest and a Zen teacher now. So, yeah, I look forward to the day when you actually get to meet her. You may have seen her or heard her on the previous full moon bodhisattva precept ceremony, where we had a successful link. So I sometimes think of my life as an experiment. An experiment in the sense that I don't know what it's actually going to end up as or what is going to come out next, or where my present set of conditions is actually going to lead to. An experiment. Probably started 30 years ago or so when I started meditating. And I remember at the time I was in engineering college and meditating, engineering college, no real contradiction. But I got it into my head that I would like to teach this meditation thing at some point. And yeah, it all seemed okay. But at some point I had the thought that I think I got more into the Dharma, not just the meditation, but into the Dharma. And I had a liberating thought. I thought there's enough engineers in the world and not enough Dharma teachers. So I jumped ship and I decided to steer my life in the direction of the Dharma and make that the focal point of my life. And the way I looked at it is that all things being considered, it doesn't really matter what you do with your life. I said to myself, it doesn't matter whether you're from the universe's point of view, it doesn't matter whether you're an engineer or a musician or a bricklayer or a Dharma teacher. But from my point of view, it's only up to me to do what I see as being the best or most important thing that I can do with my life. And by taking the risk, because at the beginning I wasn't sure that it would actually pay off, and I'm still not sure that it has paid off, however. In taking the risk, I said, well, what's the worst that can happen? And the worst that could happen would be that I decide after a few years that it was all a hoax and a waste of time. And I end up back where I started. That seems to be the worst that can happen. And even if it got worse than that, even if I was to, we'll say, end up unemployed, living on government assistance, and living in a government housing estate at least then I would know that I took a chance and did what was closest to my heart. I took the chance and decided to see what would happen if I did this. So here I am, 25, 30 years later, and I still don't know how things are going to unfold. This online teaching is an experiment. I'm glad to see that it seems to be working out reasonably well. People, you, seem to be enjoying it and finding it nourishing or helpful. I hope it's more than just entertainment, nothing better to do. And I'm finding it a great way to connect, maintain our connection, and maintain a sense of practicing together. One of the questions that was asked when I was practicing with the Western Buddhist order, one of the questions that it was suggested you ask yourself in terms of your meditation practice or in terms of doing what you want to do with your life, one of the questions to ask was, what is holding me back? And that can be a useful question to ask yourself from time to time. What do I really want to do? What would make my heart sing? And what is holding me back? I like to watch movies, as I've said from time to time. A great way to see what happens to people when they make certain choices. Great way to see how circumstances and decisions conspire to lead to certain situations. Yeah, it's entertaining. And every so often I take a line from a movie, I think it's a good one, and I keep it with me for a while or for a long time. And I was delighted that at the end of the retreat, the Seijiki retreat, a line that I frequently use, I got to replace it. So those of you who are there at the end of the retreat will know what I'm referring to. I'm not too sure what movie it is with Al Pacino, but he says from time to time, it ain't over till the fat lady sings. And I've thought of that in a situation where you're hoping for a particular outcome and the odds are going against you or conditions are going against you. And I'd say to myself, or I'd say to my companion, it isn't over till the fat lady sings. So I guess it means that the show isn't over or the opera isn't over until the fat lady sings. We never know what the outcome is going to be until the outcome is there. So at the end of the Seijiki retreat, I came away with a new phrase. It ain't over till the dog barks. And I'm looking forward to an opportunity to use that. I will say to my companion who is getting worried about what the outcome of a test is going to be, or whether they're going to get fired from their job, or whether they're going to lose their job, or whatever, I can say, it ain't over till the dog barks. So there's another question that comes from that. Does the dog have Buddha nature? And at the end of the retreat, I thought, definitely. Timing was just so perfect. Of course, the dog has Buddha nature. But when I was sitting in Zazen and what I think I heard the dog eating in front of the microphone, I thought, definitely not. Dog does not have Buddha nature. So Zhao, as you may know, was asked this question. Does the dog have Buddha nature? And he said, no. He said no, and the monk who asked the question said, why not? I thought all beings have Buddha nature. So Zhao says, because he still has impulsive consciousness. So what does impulsive consciousness have to do with not having Buddha nature? How is impulsive consciousness somehow opposed to Buddha nature? I prefer to use the phrase compulsive rather than impulsive, but impulsive is probably better. Can use both of them. What does compulsiveness or impulsiveness have that makes it un-Buddha-like? So these questions, if we do a practice period, and we are doing a practice period, if you do a practice period at Green Gulch and Tassajara, they have these ceremonies called a Shosan ceremony. And that's where every person in the practice period gets to ask the person leading the practice period a question. So they're called Shosan ceremonies. Not to be confused with Chosan ceremonies. Chosan ceremonies are where you sit around with the teacher having a formal cup of tea and bring up certain topics or certain questions for conversation. But a Shosan ceremony is where each person in the practice period gets to ask the teacher a question. And not just the people in the practice period, but the residents of Green Gulch, Tassajara, Green Gulch and San Francisco Zen Center, the residents who are not doing the practice period also get to ask the teacher a question. So it's quite formal. You make a bow, kneel in choki, put your hands in gasho, ask your question, teacher gives an answer, you say thank you and leave, or you're allowed a follow-up question if it's relevant. So I assume that this monk was asking a question in a Shosan ceremony. And he asked his follow-up question. Now, I think I mentioned this on my website. In the reading room or the Sangha room, there's a tab called Koans. And I mentioned this story. And somebody put in a comment. Interestingly enough, it was a comment that I had heard about a year before. But I had heard it when I was co-leading a Zen and Yoga retreat with Shokuchi at Tassajara. And the comment goes, there is a debate whether Jiaozhou actually said no or not. The word for no in China is bu. But it's also very closely sounding like the word for woof. So the debate was that maybe Jiaozhou did not say no. Maybe Jiaozhou said woof. Now, there's two things that mitigate against that perspective. The first thing is the follow-up question from the monk. The follow-up question doesn't make sense if Jiaozhou said woof. And another thing that mitigates against it is that later on in the Blue Cliff record, another monk asks Jiaozhou, does the dog have Buddha nature? And Jiaozhou says, yes. So I like to think of both these questions being asked in the same ceremony. So one monk gets up and asks the teacher, does the dog have Buddha nature? And the teacher says no. And another monk gets up and asks the teacher, does the dog have Buddha nature? And the teacher says yes. So does the dog have Buddha nature? And Jiaozhou says yes. And the monk says, well, I thought Buddha nature is all pure and perfect. So how come the dog is going around with such a mangy old coat? And Jiaozhou says, he does it for you. So there you have it. We've all got dog nature. We are all the dog. And we can ask Jiaozhou, do I have Buddha nature? And he says, yes. And then say, well, why do I suffer so much? You're doing that for others. You ask him again, do I really have Buddha nature? And he says, no. And say, oh, how come I don't? I thought everybody has. You still have impulsive consciousness. So these two answers, particularly the follow-up answers, give us a clue or maybe an insight or perspective on what Buddhism is teaching. This impulsive consciousness or compulsive consciousness. We got kind of into that realm last night in class when we had read the introduction to Thanissaro's book, The Wings to Awakening, and to some extent also in the chapter on skillfulness. In the introduction, he talks about how it's the intention, the action, the result, and the reaction to the result. And how we can observe the process of mental activity and notice this dynamic that goes on. I would say we can also notice our impulsivities or our impulsiveness. And by not acting on the impulsiveness, we get one, to see it more clearly, and two, we become free of it. So it isn't so much that we don't have Buddha nature, but that we're not always able to manifest it. Or we are always manifesting it, but we don't always get to see it. And the other part of Thanissaro's book that I drew some attention to last night, that the Buddha, or the prince actually thinks, well, if I'm subject to illness, I shouldn't look down upon people who become ill. And then in one translation it says, the vanity of well-being left me. And I forget how it was phrased, the intoxication of well-being left me. Or the taking it for granted of well-being left me. So what Thanissaro didn't say in the introduction was that the reason he was thinking about old age, disease, and death was because he had persuaded an attendant to take him out of the palace. And on 4 occasions, he had 4 sights. On the first one, I think it was an old person suffering from advanced old age. On the second one, it was a diseased person. And on the third one, it was a dead person. And these he had never encountered before because his father stage managed the palace so that the young prince would never encounter suffering. So he went outside the palace and encountered it. And these 3 sites in early Buddhism are known as the three messengers. They help to frame the problem of life. How are we to live when what is in store for us is old age, disease, sickness, and death? And hence you've got Zhaozhou's answer, why does the dog, if he's pure, like Buddha nature, pure and perfect, why does he go around in this mangy old coat? He does it for you. He is a messenger. He is presenting you with impermanence. And that shapes how you think about life. But there was a fourth sight when the Buddha went out. And the fourth sight was one of these samanas that Thanissaro mentions. They were wandering investigators or wandering experimentalists. They were trying through various practices to unlock the secret of life. In particular, to unlock the secret of escaping from the rounds, the endless rounds of rebirth. And on the fourth sight, when he was out with his attendant and he met one of these mendicant, wandering, ascetic practitioners, he noticed that there was something different about this person. And when you've been on a retreat and you come off the retreat and you go into a shop, people may notice that there is something different about you. Your sense of presence and composure, which seems quite normal and natural to you, can seem remarkable to somebody else. And so it's easy to extrapolate from that. And maybe you've encountered a few people who have a certain presence about them. So the prince, or the Buddha to be, encountered one of these wanderers and thought something different about this person. And asked his companion, like, well, what's the story here? And his companion explained that this was a wandering ascetic who was seeking to find liberation from the endless rounds of rebirth through various ascetic practices and meditation practices. So when the Buddha got home to the palace, he was having his reflections on well-being, youth, and living. And the vanity of well-being left him, the vanity of youth left him, and the vanity of life left him, or as Thanissaro put it last night, the intoxication of youth left him, the intoxication of well-being left him, and the intoxication of living left him. But there was the fourth sight, because these three sights frame the problem. But the fourth sight offers a possible path to the solution. Framing the problem is not enough, but if you can also offer a possible solution, then you've got more of a complete picture. So my life is an experiment. I didn't know I was going to be this year spending so much of my life online. I kind of got drawn into it. One thing leads to another. And the same is probably true of all of you. You weren't expecting to be spending so much time online. When you're meditating, are you online or offline? Or both on and off? As we sit in silence, allowing whatever sounds are happening around us to happen, allowing the variations of light to take place, sitting in the silence of our heart, an exciting thought may occur to you. It may be something that you can do after Zazen. And in that exciting thought, you notice your impulsiveness or your impulsivity. Or it may be as you go about your daily life that you get to notice your impulsiveness. And the reason that I prefer the word compulsive, because when the impulse leads to a certain compulsion, where you feel compelled to pursue a certain path, it's as though your perspective of the universe shrinks, and all you can see is the object of your impulsiveness or compulsiveness, what you are impulsed towards or compelled towards. And it's in that shrinking of perspective and that narrowing of self and object, polarity or duality, that we move away from expressing our Buddha nature. It kind of runs in the opposite direction of open awareness. That open awareness that simply allows things to be there. That open awareness that doesn't see here and there, doesn't see self and object. Last night after class, I ended up watching some YouTube. And one of the things I did for the practice period is that I canceled my Netflix subscription because I really don't have time to be watching movies. So I watched these YouTube 15-minute or sometimes half an hour stories. And last night I was drawn into this thing that said, what was Earth like 300,000 years ago? Oh, okay. So it's kind of fascinating, the different kinds of animals that were around 300,000 years ago. Yeah. And some of them that were around 300,000 years ago continued in existence until as recent as about 4,000 years ago. And I thought, nature just like generates these species, just probably as many species as you or I have thoughts in our lifetime. Just species after species after species, coming into existence, going extinct, coming into existence, going extinct. And for species that have existed for millions of years, nature, it seems, doesn't think twice about just letting them go extinct. In the same way that so many of your thoughts, you just let them go. Maybe you record them. Maybe you record them in a voice recorder or a diary. But no matter how hard you try to do that, you cannot record them all. And in the recording, you're choosing which ones to record and which ones not to. So for 2.5 billion years or more on this planet alone, nature has been generating species upon species upon species. And they've been going extinct and extinct and extinct. So nature will give as little thought to a civilization of human beings that lasts several thousand years as it does to a species that lasts several million years. And what does nature make of an experiment in democracy that's just 250 years old or so? One of the species, and possibly more than one, but one of the species that nature has put forth has tried to organize itself along various lines. And one of those experiments is democracy. To us, it seems very important. But nature, no. And what about a spiritual practice that allows the practitioners to come to a cessation of dukkha or dissatisfaction? Allows the practitioners to see things as it really is. Does nature care about that? Hmm. this path that leads to the end of dukkha, or the cessation of dukkha. It's very rare, and the opportunity to practice it, they say it occurs once in 100,000 million kalpas, which is probably once in 100,000 million galaxies. Okay. We have the opportunity to practice, and I am grateful for that opportunity. I'm grateful for the opportunity to practice with you and to meet you in our practice. I'm grateful that we're living in a country that allows us to practice. And that we're living in a climate that is not so severe as to make living a real struggle. There was another YouTube episode that I watched today, and they found the remains of one of our predecessors, Homo erectus, one of the species that was hominid but pre-Homo sapien. And fascinating that they can tell from the remains, which was almost a complete skeleton of about 3 million years ago. And they could tell from the damage to the bones that this, I don't know whether I should say person or not, person or animal, this person had died from an overdose of vitamin A, which told people that they had eaten too much liver, too much animal liver, and probably died a very painful death. So there you would have somebody ill, headaches, eye aches, bone aches, various kinds of pain, and not knowing what caused it. And life, I suppose, back then and since then has been very much a struggle. The struggle to survive. So I'm grateful that we live in a time where, at least for me, survival is not a struggle. But for a good part of the world, it is. Do we have Buddha nature or not? Like everything in Zen, the answer is yes and no. Thank you all very much.